Everyone you see is acting. In one way or another, they behave differently in different situations, and doing so is only natural. When I put out an image of myself, I'm conscious of every aspect of it. From my terrible posture to my dumb haircut, every aspect of myself is under my scrutiny to some degree before you end up seeing it. Every face is a mask, a slight variation of the truth underneath, worn to suit the situation. From the title of this video, it should be obvious I'm going to discuss the ways people construct these masks online, but it is important to note that every behaviour I mention has its parallels offline too. Oh, and because I twice rewrote this script after YouTubers I follow made videos on similar topics, some of my discussion may sound a little disjointed and a little more focused on myself than I originally wanted it to be. So, to begin, I want to apologise. Hi, I'm Tim. You probably know me better as Various. And by now you probably know I've done something pretty bad. I didn't meet the standards that I set for myself. I didn't behave the way I think I should have. And I'm deeply sorry about that. I wish I could take it all back. I wish I didn't do it. I wish I could say I was better than that. But I'd prove a liar because I did it. Yes, it's true. I posted links to my own content on Reddit. I'm so sorry. I wish I could say it wouldn't happen again, but it will, because this is a dumb bit in a video. It's insincere. Insincerity is an interesting thing on the internet, especially in apologies. I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever come across an online apology that truly comes across as genuine. Earlier I mentioned the masks people wear in public, and these apologies always begin with an attempt to remove that mask. The problem is, you can only ever replace that mask with another, your regular one with an unapologetic one. People want to signal their sincerity, but regardless of how sincere you actually are, if you're posting that sincerity online, it comes down to a choice of how to present it. How do you position the camera? What setup do you have behind you? What about lighting, framing, and sound concerns? If you don't consider these aspects, you'll likely be accused of treating the situation as just another day. See Philip Mewson's quote-unquote apology after he got caught plagiarizing a YouTuber's review.
I'm not really sure where to start, because there's a lot that I need to say. But if you're watching this video, then you probably already heard about the plagiarism allegations.
One of the reasons people were angry with that video was that it was monetized. It was probably set to the upload default settings without thought. He probably didn't consider it at all, but the message it sent was clear. Mewson wasn't genuine. Of course, his video lacking an actual apology to the YouTuber from whom he stole the review certainly didn't help either.
As for Boomstick, I have nothing but the best wishes for him, and I hope that his wave of success lasts a long time. A lot of you watching this video might not know my story, but I also started out as a YouTuber, so I completely understand what it's like being a small YouTuber trying to make a name for yourself. I mean, Boomstick, just keep doing what you're doing, man. It looks like you have a great thing going, and I've got nothing but respect for you.
So, how can you appear genuine? Anything you post online after the fact will have some thought behind it, and those thoughts are usually interpreted as insincerity on the part of the person in question. Roseanne Barr knew this, and decided acting in the exact opposite way to how she was expected to in an apology was the way to go.
I'm trying to talk about Iran! I'm trying to talk about Valerie Jarrett wrote the Iran deal!
I know, but you've told me this 300 times. Do you know that if...
That's what my tweet was about!
I know, you've explained this literally 300 times.
I thought the bitch was white! God damn it! I bitch was white!
Suffice to say, that doesn't work either. Of course, apologies aren't the only interesting way people present themselves online. There's also the mediated self, the marketing material for you, produced by you, for people that probably know you wouldn't measure up in reality. I don't like vlogs. I don't follow vloggers. But I'm endlessly fascinated by Yamato. Her work could be considered a vlog, and Yamato herself could be considered a vlogger, but by virtue of presenting herself as an animated character and spending what is almost certainly hours on entirely mundane scenes, while committing to the joke that she really is an animated character, her work becomes something more than a vlog, something that says something, even if I can't understand exactly what.
So, I finally hit 100,000 subscribers.
How long did it take you to do that?
Nearly 7 years.
You must be so embarrassed!
Her work confuses me, and I love it. Personality and how it's constructed online is always fascinating, but especially so when so much effort has gone into portraying the relatively mundane. Online, the line between acting out a character and acting as you normally might is blurred. Identity is performative, and how that identity is performed over the lifetime of a channel is one of the great draws of YouTube. People on the platform aren't friends, but they're more accessible than traditional media personalities. Their mediated self being what is sold, whereas other media figures use their mediated selves to sell the media that made them known in the first place. See the interviews actors or directors give, as opposed to those a so-called influencer might. The former will typically discuss projects they worked on, while the latter is the project they're working on. It's also fascinating to see how the same person acts in different situations. Jordan Peterson is a man with a bunch of ideas and political stances I don't like, but it's fascinating to me to see how much more likable he is in this video.
For my bosses watching, I have read this, and I fully endorse its message, and will continue the crusade, comrades.
Who did the little cover design?
Michelle Guthrie.
No.
Yep.
Very funny.
Thank you.
Very funny.
Dr. Peterson, we're out of time. Thank you for destroying me.
Yeah.
In which he seems to have a bit of a sense of humour than he is as soon as he's in a serious interview or panel discussion, such as this appearance on Q&A, in which he becomes immediately aggressive and increasingly incoherent at the smallest perceived insult.
99.9% of bricklayers are men. Should we have quotas for women?
Is bricklaying representative democracy?
That has nothing to do with the question. The question is if there's evidence of structural inequality and oppression because women aren't precisely represented at 50% in all professions at all levels, then why don't we have a conversation about having women represented in all professions at all levels? Why do we talk about the C-suite, for example? Why do we talk about politics and positions of power? Why don't we talk about it across the board?
Okay, so let's just pause and...
yeah, but that's because it's power.
You pose a question to Terry Butler, go ahead and answer it, then we'll hear from the other panellists.
His question to me?
Well, yeah, if you'd like to answer the question about bricklayers...
There's nothing wrong with bricklayers.
Why there are no quotas in...
Of course there's not. It's just...
I think you were trying to draw a distinction between bricklaying and running the government.
And I was suggesting that a representative democracy should be representative. That was the point I made. And I
representative of it by quota?
Well, sure, if that's what it takes. I mean,
yeah, well, that's exactly what you would say.
But you know, I can...
It's the same man, but in one interview I can actually understand why he's popular with a certain group of people, even while despising his beliefs. But in the other, I just can't. People put on a different act for different audiences, and while the person wearing each mask remains the same, the masks themselves can vary wildly. It may sound like I'm implying people are dishonest online, that they are entirely artificial. That's not what I'm trying to say here, but generally speaking, they aren't quite being themselves. As a child, people tell you to be yourself. It's a nice sentiment, but one I'd be inclined to change a little. Don't be yourself, be yourselves. What I mean by that is everyone has sets of behaviours that won't make sense outside of the context in which they first arose. For example, I follow competitive TF2, and at the beginning of last year had an internship producing videos for an innovation space where I worked under Ali. Twice I misspelt her name as Ali, a well-respected demoman in the European TF2 scene. Explaining why I misspelt her name wouldn't make much sense, bar the narrow possibility she was familiar with the tiny TF2 scene, so I apologised and moved on. The self I presented at that innovation space was different to the one I might on teamfortress.tv. I was being myself, but I was aware of which of myselves I was being. This certainly extends to my presence on YouTube too, even changing on a video-to-video basis depending on the topic. Some topics will invite a more political perspective, while others would have me leave such politics out entirely. I present aspects of my online selves on this channel that I wouldn't in person, a jumble of different parts of me assembled under the label various. I try to be as honest as I can in presenting that jumble, but I can only ever present myselves, not the singular myself. Various is not a good name for a YouTube channel. It tells you nothing about what I do or want to be doing. It means nothing, but still isn't unique enough to have me rank highly in the search terms. So why various then? Well, it wasn't always my first choice. I used to go by Control-Alt-Delete on Steam, Salts being my last name. But as being salty became common parlance for being upset, I thought that gave the wrong impression. You can actually see the remnants of that name in the URL of my second channel. Various Horses, a name I took from my favourite song on an album I produced with my old band, and also the track you're listening to now, is what I go as on Steam today, and I would have done so on YouTube as well, if that weren't an even less descriptive name than Various. So Various it was, a meaningless moniker that maybe one day would accrue some association with what I do. Other aspects of how I present myself online are a combination of who I want to be, habit, the gear I use to make videos, and some remnants of the ideas I had for my channel before I began it. My logo I've spoken about before, but I didn't really mention what it meant when I first drew it. Before it was associated with the channel, it was a stylized skull I had drawn as a kid, and started drawing again while particularly unhappy at uni. It became an expression of longing for the past, a longing for the childhood I had loved. Just as Various Horses meant something different before I named my channel Various, so too did that skull. It became a symbol of how I appear online, of an idealized version of myself, and one I like a lot more than my offline self. So the other trigger warnings were sort of a joke, but this one isn't. Just a heads up, like the title of this segment implies, the discussion here will get a little heavy. The split between public and private is always interesting, but it becomes especially fascinating in criminals. The split between their public persona and their criminal acts has been, and continues to be, the focus of a lot of popular media. We love watching a villain reveal their true face, or a protagonist's slow descent into evil, but the reality of such a split is hardly enjoyable. In high school, we had a tech support staffer I'm going to call Mr. T. Mr. T always seemed a lovely man, one who would chat with students and seemed to genuinely enjoy his job. He looked a bit like a garden gnome, minus the strange hat, with a long white beard and a smile that always reached his eyes. I had little to do with him, but respected him, liked him even. After working for 2 years at our school, he killed his wife, cat, and then himself. Without much contact with Mr. T, this didn't have a large impact on me at the time, but I kept thinking about him. I keep thinking about him. I only knew him to be a lovely man, until he wasn't. That was how a lot of students felt. So when a little more information trickled down to us, we tried to interpret his actions through the lens of who we knew him to be. We heard his wife had had terminal cancer, and suddenly we could, at least partially, reconcile the two Mr. T's. Whether it was assisted suicide, some sort of quote-unquote mercy killing, or a freak out at the idea of living without her, Mr. T could somehow retain some element of the nice man he had seemed to be. This may not seem relevant, but it's not the split between Mr. T's actions and the way he appeared that is actually what I want to highlight here. Rather, I'm talking about how I attempt to reconstruct him online. I avoid using photos or his name to spare his family any unwanted attention, but also to reconstruct him the way I remembered him. The garden gnome comparison does apply to his appearance, but also suggests something of his demeanour, which was not accidental. When I reveal what he did without warning, I did so because that was how it felt, totally surprising, and to the many that liked him, deeply disturbing. I relate the story of his wife only in relation to his actions, a reflection of how we heard about it and how she was framed in the media coverage, as an accessory to Mr. T, a puzzle piece in the picture of why. People don't merely construct themselves online, but also others. Creating an image of someone else often reveals something of the creator. In Mr. T's story, you may have seen a desperate attempt to reassure myself that I wasn't that wrong about him. You might have seen some curiosity that dehumanized those involved, or a hint of the sorts of discussions teenagers have when suddenly confronted by mortality and all its implications. I don't know what you saw, but there were some elements of me mixed in with my version of Mr. T. Somehow, his story is a part of mine. And I'm not talking about Mr. T, but rather how I remember Mr. T. So what's the idea behind this video? He asks rhetorically. I guess I'm interested in how people construct themselves because I'm always conscious of how I construct myself. Ever since primary school, I've been aware of my identity and how I act it out. It was as though someone had told me that my tongue doesn't have a place to sit comfortably in my mouth, and I never stopped being conscious of that. I became aware that I presented differently to each and every person. This realization manifested itself in social anxiety. I was a chameleon, switching colours to signal different things to different people, and I couldn't manage to switch colours quickly enough when I was in groups larger than 3. Parties were hell, and I'd just try to blend into the background, to become as boring as the corner I stood in so no one would bother me. All of this is just an illustration of mild social anxiety, of course, but as I use this chameleon metaphor in trying to explain myself to friends, another thought arose. What colour was I? I changed so many times for so many people, but what colour was I before? It's a question I still wonder about, but ultimately can't answer. As I mentioned earlier, identity is performative, and for me it's a performance I change with every audience. To bring this all back to the discussion at hand, the ways I might deliberately construct my identity doesn't make that identity false, and indeed may become my personality as a result of acting it out. To quote Kurt Vonnegut's introduction to Mother Night, "You are who you pretend to be." I present my personality online in colours I might not in person, but they aren't any less real. There is a gap, but it's much smaller than the gap between public and private was for Mr. T. And while this video might be seen as an introspective look at that gap between my own presence online and offline, I'm also interested in how others approach, construct, or attempt to obscure that gap. So, whether you're a chameleon that can't remember their colour, or just annoyed that your tongue feels strange in your mouth now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you present yourself online? Cheers. Have a good one.